Здравствуйте!
Salutations! Did you know that Binkov has a new exclusive t-shirt offer? Yeah, that's him piloting that bad motherfucker. If you like our design, feel free to pre-order it via the link in the description below. Could make for a nice Christmas gift. Offer ends by December 3rd, so hurry up. Now on with our video. Today we are discussing, can German army conquer Switzerland? Of course, given the much larger population and economy, such a question might seem trivial. But could German army do it in a fairly short time span, say within a year? As always, our usual rules will apply. Switzerland is much smaller. Its border with Germany is not very long. With such proximity of two belligerents, battles could start right away. While the Swiss active army is much smaller than German, more of their soldiers are positioned much closer to the border. While there would be little point for the Swiss to try and cross the border, thus stretching their own defense lines, this particular German exclave could fall. Also, this protrusion could be temporarily overrun by the Swiss, as they consolidate their defense line, as well as southern part of German city of Constance. But realistically, the first defensive line would be only a buffer. Swiss would know they could not defend it once the Germans arrive in numbers. They would eventually retreat to this line, behind River Rhine, and perhaps even more importantly, behind these lakes. One needs to be careful when comparing army numbers, as different countries define them differently. German army is usually credited with less troops, as many of their troops are under joint services. Swiss army, on the other hand, already includes most of the joint services. Besides the active units, Germany has very few reservists which actually train and participate in exercises. Swiss defense system is different. Most of their army is conscript based. Those conscripts, once out of active army, form a militia force. As such, they spend a few weeks per year training. Overall, a Swiss militiaman receives much more training than a German reservist. But average Swiss soldier still gets much less experience than average German soldier. Germans enjoy the benefit of multi-year professional army contracts. The nature of militia service also means most Swiss troops are not really training for offensive operations. Overall, the number of troops getting at least some training is surprisingly on Swiss side. But this does not include the rest of the population, which may have had some military experience at some point in their lives. Due to distance of most units from the border and relative lack of funding for operations and maintenance, Germans would take some time to start their offensive. But Germany is much bigger, and the potential to eventually get all those units manned and supplied should not be questioned. The Swiss would have time to fortify their defense lines. Germans enjoy an edge in active duty tanks, as well as in tracked infantry fighting vehicles. The Swiss rely on lighter wheeled vehicles. German army has a lot more various personnel carriers for mobile operations. At a contrast to that, most Swiss militiamen are not to use vehicles, but are to man the bunkers and hold the line. Due to perceived threats from 1930s throughout the Cold War, Switzerland has steadily built a network of various bunkers, tank obstacles and other fortifications. Various tunnels and bridges all over the country are also designed to be blown up and collapsed. Swiss train for rapid mobilization of their militiamen and may even deploy them a bit faster than Germany could assemble their active army units. But Germany would definitely be on the initiative. Not only do their soldiers get more training, but their air force would quickly achieve control of the skies. Although Swiss F-18s have been modernized and use latest air-to-air weapons, Germany has many more capable fighters. Some of their Eurofighters can also use guided bombs. When it comes to air support for the troops, situation is even worse for the Swiss. Their F-5s are old and carry only Maverick missiles and dumb bombs. Their F-18s are relegated to a scouting role with their search pods without precision weapons. Basically, Swiss Air Force would have to disperse as quickly as possible. They use two bases for their fighters, but in reality, small field units operating from highways would often be in action as well, if Swiss Air Force is to survive the initial onslaught. With German numbers and cruise missile barrage, Swiss Air Force would really be relegated to occasional interceptions. And their numbers would quickly start dropping, even if they get similar kill ratios in those few interceptions they do attempt. Swiss air defenses lack any sort of high-altitude systems, so Germany would be free to bomb the Swiss front line almost at will. Air supremacy also means the Swiss could not do a lot of recon and pinpoint future German offensives. Germany possesses a much more robust aerial recon inventory. Any drones or planes Swiss would use would eventually get shot down. Germany would also enjoy an edge in scouting and anti-armor due to their attack helicopters. Swiss Rapier batteries and shoulder-launched anti-aircraft missiles would present a threat to them though. The only silver lining Swiss Air Force enjoy are the fact their pilots train a bit more, and the fact actual availability of German equipment is worse than theirs. While a decently funded military usually enjoys 50 to 70% availability rates, German military has been underfunded for years. Result is quite poor availability rate for most of their systems. But even so, when it comes to aerial mobility, the Swiss are outmatched. German helicopters could help with incursions of small units in the Alpine region or over the rivers, and German transport planes could eventually land the sole German airborne assault brigade far behind the Swiss front line if needed. Thus, the Germans could concentrate their forces mostly at will and push inside Switzerland, while less mobile Swiss troops would struggle to perform a counter-offensive. The one area Swiss aren't behind in is artillery. It's one of the few means of fire support they have. Theirs is fairly modernized. The range discrepancy mostly comes from expensive gun rounds Germany might use. Still, those guns would either need to be moved constantly, meaning only a fraction of them could be used at once, or they would eventually be hunted down from the air. So Swiss would not be well off, but they do have one key advantage: geography. As Germans would start pushing, Swiss would abandon northernmost part of their country and retreat behind the river Rhine. Two lakes would make the remaining front line quite short. What that means is there would be a huge concentration of forces on a small area. During the Cold War, Soviets and NATO decided there's a useful limit to number of troops per every kilometer of the front. Adding more was deemed inefficient due to congestion. While both sides would need over a month to reach the troop numbers suggested earlier, the troop levels per kilometer of the front line would somewhat approach the Cold War levels. Added issues compared to hypothetical Cold War Soviet push through Germany would be the fact the whole of the front is behind a water obstacle. Securing a bridgehead with numerous enemies across a wide river would be extremely costly for the Germans, leading to very high casualties. Furthermore, Switzerland is mostly either mountains and forests, basically impassable for large motorized formations, or urbanized. Urban centers also make it very costly for an armored push to fight through. Due to better recon data and more hardware, Germans would eventually break through. If they persist, despite their losses being a few times higher, their war machine would get the availability rates of their systems back on track. And their much bigger population would mean they would have many more fresh conscripts. But a greater portion of the Swiss mobilized population would have some army service experience due to their conscription laws. Still, over time, the Swiss would lose more of their territory. After months of heavy fighting, they would have to fall back on the second defensive line. River Ahr and River Limmat, alongside the Zurich urban sprawl, would form the center, while the Lake Zurich and the Alps would form the eastern part. Western part of the front would see heavy German attacks, trying to cut Swiss forces in two. But the Jura Mountains would slow Germans considerably. Months more would pass. Germany would, through mobilization, have considerable numerical superiority. Although Swiss have a robust small arms and even portable missile industry, it would be no match for German weapons industry. The front line would eventually, perhaps after a year, move further into Switzerland. Most of the northern Switzerland is snow-free throughout most of the year, suiting the Germans. The fairly flat part of the front would become even narrower, suiting the Swiss. German advantage in recon technology, numbers and heavy vehicles would be of little use to them in the other Alpine part of the front line. By that point, Germany could declare itself a winner. It would have conquered a fair chunk of Switzerland, including most of the urbanized areas. But in doing that, it would have lost several times more soldiers. If we are talking about a total multi-year war, the Swiss would eventually have to flee into the Alps and try to hold onto the cities near Lake Geneva. Ultimately, the Swiss would have pulled off another winter war. a war which Germans, just like Soviets back then, eventually technically won, but a war which would remain in history as humiliation of the German armed forces. Final verdict: German marginal victory. Big thanks goes to all my patrons on Patreon. Without you, we wouldn't be able to make as many videos. Do subscribe if you like my content, and if you want to be notified about new videos, don't forget to click that bell button. And remember, Binkov may talk about hypothetical wars, but only real peace can bring us all together.